try that again. Enjoying some delicious ice water. See? I'm not drinking. I'm not drinkskin. It is New Year's Eve, and I'm making some videos. I got bored. This is unrequested. This is Abraham Lincoln, the Great Emancipator documentary. This is it's a new channel. First video I'm doing from them. The People Profiles. And they have, I saw this one first. They have quite a few videos. And there were some good ones, and they're long, so I'm going to do them. This is a 55-minute. I'm going to break it down into 4 14-minute videos. There you go. I don't know what this is on screen. Abraham Lincoln, Great Emancipator. Is this Gettysburg? I don't know. Let's just get into it.
It is the 19th of November, 1863. Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, stands to address his fellow Americans at a cemetery built on the site of the Great Battle of Gettysburg. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men...
We're going to start all over, sorry.
It is the 19th of November, 1863. Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, stands to address his fellow Americans at a cemetery built on the site of the Great Battle of Gettysburg. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives.
Gettysburg is a massive
that field as a final resting place.
Like this up here, I want to say is Little Round Top, and I think Devil's Den. This might be Devil's Den is in here, maybe. Anyways, the Round Top and the Devil's Den is the whole place is just, it's crazy.
For those who here gave their lives that nation might live, it is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honoured dead we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Before we begin, a quick word from our sponsor, Blinkist. Do you wish you were better read and informed about the deeds, ideas, and writings of some of history's greatest figures? But
that was a short ad. Thank you, Blinkist, for your short ad.
The man known to history as Abraham Lincoln was born on the 12th of February, 1809, in Sinking Spring Farm, a backwoods log cabin consisting of one room near Hodgenville in the state of Kentucky in the United States. His father was Thomas Lincoln, a skilled carpenter as well as a farmer, and although illiterate, like most pioneer frontiersmen, he was well respected amongst his community as an honest churchgoer, and was the descendant of a weaver's apprentice who had migrated from Hingham in mid-Norfolk, England, to Massachusetts in 1637. His mother, Nancy Hanks, is a somewhat mysterious figure, believed to be of illegitimate birth, and originating from a line of modest Virginia farmers, and after bearing 3 children, Sarah, Abraham, and Thomas, who died in infancy, Nancy herself died in the autumn.
I got some overseas viewers, so if they do watch this video, Nancy Hanks, if you don't know, last name, is the descendant of Tom Hanks, actor. So, you know, it's just kind of a cool thing. As I've said before, I jokingly said, Lincoln was killed by John Wilkes Booth, an actor. The Hanks family has actors. So, and I've said this jokingly, but the government needs to be aware of where Tom Hanks is whenever he's near Washington, D.C. I'm just saying. Can't trust him.
Of 1818, when Abraham, her youngest child, was just 9 years old. Thomas Lincoln had married Nancy Hanks on the 12th of June, 1806, in Washington County, and the family then moved to Elizabethtown in Kentucky, where the young Lincoln's father leased or bought farms, but losing all but 200 acres of his property in a dispute over property titles, his father moved his family to the neighboring state of Indiana in 1816, when Abraham was 7, which was a free or non-slaveholding territory where the rules over property ownership and title were more reliable. Abraham's father opposed slavery on religious and moral grounds. As a member of the Separate Baptist Church, whose members held a strict code of morality, and these views were shared by Abraham, who remarked in 1864 that he could not remember a time when he was not opposed to the practice of slavery, and years later, Abraham Lincoln would state that his father left Kentucky partly on account of slavery, but chiefly on account of the difficulty in land titles. Although Abraham and Thomas enjoyed a good relationship during Lincoln's childhood, as he grew up, Lincoln came to feel resentment towards his father's intellectual limitations.
From my understanding, they didn't have the best getting along in childhood. Now, I could have just heard about a few experiences and maybe linked it that way, but I was under the impression that Lincoln was more of a reader and his dad was a hard worker and asked him to, you know, work more, read less, because Thomas didn't have that kind of an education, or he didn't have the chance. He had to work. A great type of story is that Thomas here was out with his father on the farm. I think Thomas was 7 or 9, or maybe he was 11. Either way, he was a kid. He was a boy, and he was out working on his farm with his father when some natives came rushing in, and Thomas's father told him to get to the cabin. They had a log cabin, and he had a brother who was in the cabin. So Thomas goes to start running and stops because they surround his dad and they just start brutally killing him. Thomas takes off running back to the cabin, and some of the natives catch up to him, and they grab one in particular, grabbed him, and I guess he was going to kill him. Thomas's brother came walking out of the cabin with a rifle and pointed and shot, and I guess he shot the native. Native let Thomas go and took off running. They left his father's body just in the farm. So, you know, you're a boy and you've just witnessed your father be killed, and you were almost killed, and your brother saves your life. That's got to play hell on you. Take it a step further, because the father died, the property went to the oldest son, which was the brother that had just saved Thomas's life. That brother then turned around and told I think it was 11-year-old, but anyways, told Thomas, you need to now experience life on your own, and kicked him off the property. So Thomas ended up, I think, living with a relative, an aunt or something like that. His brother kicked him out. You got to be a man now. I'm a man now because I have this property. So, you know, maybe that explains a little bit of why he was the way he was. But he had a harder life than Abraham did. But anyways, sorry for my rambling.
And after leaving his father's world at the age of 21, Lincoln would never see him again, and as he grew older, Abraham Lincoln did not care to discuss his ancestry, as in his mind, he was a self-made man, and as he grew into political prominence, he became somewhat embarrassed about his frontier origins.
Also, there's a church in Massachusetts, something. I could go find the book right now and try to find it, but it's just a little too much time. I'll get it for the next one. Remember this. Lincoln's family came from England, and there is a church, Massachusetts, somewhere in that, New England, I don't know. But the church still stands today, but his family built it, and it's considered, I think, one of the longest freestanding churches still around today. So he does have some history there.
Only publicly reminiscing on his youth and upbringing.
He had nothing to do with building it. Let me go back and say that. It was his family moving from England in like the 1600s, something like that. I just muted it. I didn't want to mute it. That's what I wanted to do.
Life in Indiana was hard for the Lincolns. He lived in a remote forest in Hurricane Township, Perry County, and had to hunt for their food, and the hardships of the family faced were to worsen after the death of Abraham's mother on the 5th of October, 1818, from milk sickness, and recognizing that his family could not go on alone, Thomas Lincoln married Sarah Sally Bush Johnston in December 1819, a widow from Elizabethtown with 3 children of her own, and she moved to Indiana with the Lincoln family and would come to be loved by young Abraham, who would call her mother. Lincoln's sister, Sarah Lincoln, became a caring and loving mother to him on his mother's death, and Abraham adored her and spoke of her in the most affectionate terms throughout his life. And when, on the 20th of January, 1828, Sarah died, giving birth to a stillborn son, Lincoln was traumatized and distraught over the death of his beloved sister. From an early age, Abraham loved to read. He would always prefer more cerebral pursuits to the hard labor involved with farm work, which his 6'4" stature as a teenager would have made him more than capable of, and so his reluctance to carry out his chores would gain him a reputation for laziness, yet he was never lazy when it came to poetry, reading, writing, and musing his time away. By the age of 15, Lincoln had been sporadically educated for a total of 1 year, as his farm chores and remote location meant he could not attend school regularly. However, Lincoln's educational grounding was enough for him to be able to teach himself through reading whatever volumes he could find. By his late teens, Lincoln was desperate to leave his isolated home, and after helping his family move to the state of Illinois in 1830, where Abraham would spend the bulk of his adult years, he departed for the town of New Salem in July 1831, leaving his family for the final time. Less than a year after moving to New Salem, several residents of the frontier town, including the president of the local debating club, which Lincoln regularly attended, impressed by Abraham's intellect and oratory skills, suggested that he run for the Illinois state legislature. Lincoln announced himself as a candidate for the state legislature in March 1832, a demonstration of the 23-year-old's supreme self-confidence, and as candidates for the Illinois state legislature at this time did not need the backing of political parties or powerful patrons, he was able to apply independently. But nevertheless, Lincoln's lack of a formal education or of any government experience, and being barely known outside of his small community, did put him at a disadvantage in the election. Consequently, on the 6th of August, Lincoln lost his bid for the state legislature and was truly disappointed, noting years later that this election was the only time he was, quote, ever beaten on a direct vote of the people. Lincoln spent the next 2 years in various forms of employment, including serving as a militia captain in the Black Hawk War with a local Native American tribe, and working as the postmaster for New Salem, and he also continued to read avidly at this time, taking a particular interest in poetry and grammar. 2 years later, he ran again for the Illinois state legislature, and after an extensive handshaking campaign, was elected on the 4th of August, 1834, And although not a very active participator in his first term in the legislature, Lincoln made numerous political acquaintances at the Illinois Capitol, including his future rival, Stephen A. Douglas, and during this time, Lincoln became determined to pursue a career in law. In March 1836, Lincoln was admitted as a practitioner of law, and after leading a bill through the legislature, which moved the capital of Illinois to the town of Springfield, it was here that Lincoln moved in April 1837, opening a law office with a senior partner.
A little quick story from what I remember, and I'm sure it's not going to be 100% accurate. Bear with me. So Lincoln lived in this house, and it was just we'll call it a ranch, just a one-story house. His wife was rich at the time. So he went off to work, and she had this addition, the second floor, and I don't know if this was added to. It might have been. But anyways, she added the second floor when he was out working. And of course, back in those days, you being out working, you weren't doing a 9 to 5 and then coming home. For him, he was out on the circuit. So you're horseback, you're going all over the place, all around the area, all over Illinois. You come back, I mean, maybe this took months. You come back and you had no idea. So I thought that was pretty funny.
That same year in Illinois, an act of violence occurred that was to highlight the growing tensions that were simmering beneath the surface of the American nation, when in November, a mob in Alton, Illinois, murdered Elijah Lovejoy, the editor of an abolitionist newspaper which had campaigned relentlessly for an end to slavery. Understandably, this brutal killing and infringement of the freedom of the press enraged the northern states and foreshadowed the violent divisions that would erupt in American society over the issue of slavery. As well as following a career in law, Lincoln's involvement and influence in Illinois politics continued to grow as he became the leader of the Whig Party in the legislature, opposing the Democratic Party's plans to destroy the State Bank of Illinois, and then, in 1841, Lincoln's law career took a dramatic leap forward when he was offered a partnership with Stephen Logan, one of the most prominent lawyers in Illinois, and under Logan's tutelage, Lincoln grew into one of the foremost lawyers in the state, and was for the first time in his life able to earn a comfortable living. The year before, Lincoln became engaged to a young woman by the name of Mary Todd, the daughter of Robert Smith Todd, a wealthy Kentuckian merchant and slave owner who had ensured that Mary had grown up in luxury, educated at the best private schools, and waited on by family slaves, and so when they met, Lincoln was quite enchanted by her beauty and intelligence. And so, unsurprisingly, Abraham and Mary were married on the 4th of November, 1842, despite Lincoln having temporarily broken off their engagement the previous year, out of the fear that he was not financially or emotionally prepared for marriage. And once they did marry, the following year, on the 1st of August, 1843, Mary gave birth to Lincoln's first child, a son whom they called Robert. Although often absent from the family home, Lincoln, when present, was an affectionate husband and father to 4 children, as after Robert came Eddie and Willie.
Robert, I think, was the longest living. He's the one who turned the home over, the Lincoln home, over to the national park system in Illinois for tours, stuff like that. He sold it to the state for $1 and made it so that it is completely free of charge to go through, and he just wanted people to, people still to this day, they just love and appreciate the president. I'm one of them. So being able to tour the home free of charge, that's awesome. And if you ever go, which I recommend, you park, visitor center, go in, get a ticket. There's stuff in there for you, gift shop if you want. But you walk out and you walk down, and it's like this big T, and it goes an entire block and a block, and I don't remember what the percentage is, but I'm going to say 50%. Don't take my word for the percentage. The homes that are standing there stood at that time, and they just kept it all. It's my dog's stomach. They kept it all. And so as you're walking through and you're looking at all this, you're looking at homes that Lincoln would have seen. Now, they're not all there, and the Parks did have to knock a couple of them down because they were falling apart, but they've done a pretty good job at kind of keeping it as it was. And that's not important, but anyways, it's a really cool thing. And then I think I'll say 6 blocks away is the library museum. You can't get into the library, you gotta have credentials and stuff like that, but the museum, when it was built, I want to say it was built in 2003. Anyways, they went in with Disney to build it, so it is, like, for interactions and stuff like that, it is top notch. It's one of the best, and it's one of the newest, but it is one of the best museums, presidential museums you can go into. It's just it's an amazing thing.
Who both died in childhood, and Thomas, or Tad Lincoln, who died of heart failure at the age of 18, and the loss of their children had long-lasting effects on both parents, as Lincoln was said to have suffered from clinical depression, or melancholy, as it was known at the time, and Mary was temporarily admitted in later life to a mental asylum by her own remaining child Robert in 1875.
Heart failure.
Once married, Lincoln's law career went from strength to strength, as he entered a new partnership in which he was the senior member and began to appear frequently in cases before the Illinois Supreme Court. Moreover, Lincoln also continued to involve himself in Whig politics and unsuccessfully ran for the Whig nomination to the US House of Representatives in 1843, but he ran again in 1846 and obtained the nomination, going on to defeat his Democratic opponent in the election for the Illinois 7th District on the 3rd of August by an unprecedented majority. From the humblest of beginnings, Abraham Lincoln had forged a successful political and legal career for himself, using his incessant love of reading and learning to pull himself out of the physical toil of his youth and into the intellectual, professional world he had always aspired to enter. And so, on the 25th of October, 1847, the Lincolns set off for Washington, and Lincoln entered Congress shortly after the Americans declared war against Mexico. The background to the Troubles began in 1840, when Texas had revolted against Mexico and obtained a treaty that gave territory to an independent Texan republic. But
by the way, in case anyone is curious, James K. Polk would be president right now, and he is number 11. And James K. Polk got the presidency, the dark horse candidate, under the guise of only serving one 4-year term, which he did, and said that he would only need that. And he had 4 things. It was like annexation of Texas, getting all the way to the Pacific Ocean, getting up to Washington, Oregon area, because England, the British were there, and the Russians were there. And then his 4th one was, insert the 4th one, as I just did, and he was able to achieve all of them. And this is not about James K. Polk, I understand, I'm just bringing it up, just so you get the context of the time. And Polk put a Lincoln questioned the war, as he should have, and Polk brought out we hear all the time, oh, you don't support the troops, and everyone was like, what? You don't support the troops, Abe? What do you do? And that was it. It's
When this treaty was repudiated by Mexico, hostilities were resumed, and Texas applied for admission to the Union, with its boundary line still in dispute. This war was controversial, however, as it was intertwined with the most dominant issue in American politics for the previous 2 decades, which was the issue of slavery, and specifically whether the institution would be permitted to expand west into the newer states admitted to the Union. This debate revolved around not just the morality of slavery, but also the balance of power in America between free and slave states, and to ensure that there remained a balance in congressional representation between these states. And so, in 1820, the Missouri Compromise was created that prohibited slavery in all territories west of the Mississippi and north of the 36° 30' parallel, or the circle of latitude 36.5 degrees north of the equator, with those states to the south able to permit slavery, with the notable exception of Missouri, which lay mostly north of the parallel but remained a slave state. The Missouri Compromise.
Interesting fact I heard, and I could be wrong on how I'm remembering it, but Missouri was a slave state. They were in the Civil War considered, slave state. They sent 40,000 troops to fight for the Confederacy in the Civil War, but they also sent 1.4 million to fight for the Union during the Civil War. They were a slave state. Interesting.
Compromise was a stopgap measure intended to temporarily suppress the fierce debates about the extension of slavery to the West and the balance of power in Congress, and as Lincoln entered Congress nearly 27 years later, these debates were beginning to re-emerge with ferocity. Abolitionists, as well as Lincoln and the majority of his Whig party, regarded the war with Mexico and Texas's admittance into the Union with deep suspicion, as the territory that Texas was able to gain from Mexico in the war would be divided into any number of states, all south of the Missouri line, allowing them all to practice slavery. Lincoln spoke out against the war in Congress, but for primarily political reasons, decrying the warmongering actions of Democratic President Polk in getting the US involved in the conflict in an attempt to boost the Whig prospects at the upcoming election. As his term was only 2 years, and Lincoln had promised not to run for a second term, his experience in Washington was to be of little consequence to his reputation and stature, and so, when his term ended later that year, Lincoln returned to Springfield, determined to focus on his legal career, and his life of public service was seemingly over.
We're going to pause it here. I mean, look, his political career is over. We don't know what he's going to do next. So you're going to have to tune in for the next episode of Abraham Lincoln, the Great Emancipator documentary. I'm going to end this. I'm going to get my book. I'm going to find that thing. And for the next video, when I was talking about that church, I'm going to read off what it was, and then I'll show a picture. So that, because it's bothering me. And now I'm hungry. That's my stomach now. Give the people something. There it goes. Oh yeah. That's what happens when you skip lunch and have a small breakfast. Okay. I'm going to end this here. End.